And what it all comes down to is how deep is your passion and purpose in
Yep.
doing what you're doing with your platform and your voice.
Podcast Junkies, episode 366. Welcome back. I'm your host, Harry Duran. If you are new to this show, it's the one where I search out interesting voices from the world of podcasting, get them to kick back their heels and talk about their shows, and more importantly, whatever else is on their mind. I've been doing that since 2014 and heading into year 11, which is crazy, just blows my mind. If you are a regular listener, then you've seen my face before. Thank you so much for all you do to support the show. Whether you were listening from episode 1 way back in 2014 or you just found me recently, I appreciate you regardless. In case you missed last episode, we had a great conversation with Jordan Gaspore. She's an environmental journalist and a podcast host who's been covering hazardous sites and environmental issues for years. We dove into her journey from a small town in Texas to becoming a passionate investigative reporter in New York City, my hometown. She shared how her early interest in horror stories of all things and journalism led her to create her first podcast in college, and how she's since become fascinated with reporting on hazardous sites across the country. Make sure you check that out if you haven't done so already. This week, I'm thrilled to welcome Marilyn Ball to the show. She's the host of Speaking of Travel, and she shares her journey from working in marketing and advertising to becoming a podcaster focused on travel stories. In this conversation, we talk about how she transitioned from city life in Washington, D.C. to homesteading in the mountains of North Carolina, and how this shift influenced her perspective on life and storytelling. Marilyn also opens up about the recent natural disaster that affected her community in Asheville and how it brought people together in unexpected ways. I've actually been to Asheville a couple of times years ago to the Moog Fest, so I remember really having a good time in that town, and it's a shame to think what might have been impacted by the recent disasters. I really enjoyed hearing her insights on building long-term relationships with sponsors and her approach to monetizing her show. Her experience in marketing shines through as she explains how she created a one-sheet to pitch potential sponsors and gradually move from short-term to annual commitments, which is something I really love chatting about. If you've heard me talk about this before with my other show, Vertical Farming Podcast, you'll know that's the model I follow. And her story is a great example of how diverse experiences can come together to create something unique and meaningful. Her passion for sharing travel stories and connecting with people from all walks of life is truly inspiring. There's 5 key takeaways I want you to listen out for in this episode. Number 1, leverage your existing skills and background starting a show. Marilyn's marketing experience helped her approach sponsorship strategically from the beginning. 2, be flexible with sponsorship arrangements, especially when starting out. Marilyn used trade deals and shorter commitments initially before moving on to annual sponsorships. 3, batch record episodes to build a queue, allowing you to take time off while maintaining a consistent publishing schedule. Something I need to get better at. Marilyn records extra episodes before traveling. Genius. 4, consider hiring help for areas outside your expertise. Marilyn and I are actually going to be working together on some marketing ideas for her show, so I'm excited to see what comes of that. 5, reach out to potential guests and opportunities, even if it feels uncomfortable. Marilyn emphasized the importance of getting out of your comfort zone to grow your show. Fascinating insights. I'm looking forward to sharing them with you. If you're enjoying this episode, or if you've enjoyed a past episode, nothing would please me more than for you to hit that subscribe button below. Also, if you're feeling extra generous, head on over to podcastjunkies.com/love. You can leave a rating and a review, and I'll get to read it out on a future episode and mention you as well. Lots to cover in this episode, but don't worry, everything's going to be in the show notes at podcastjunkies.com, where we have a summary, timestamps, key takeaways, resources from the guest as well. All right, enjoy my conversation with Marilyn. So Marilyn Ball, host of Speaking of Travel, thank you so much for joining me on Podcast Junkies.
Thank you for having me, Harry. I'm excited to be here today.
So we're just chatting a little bit before we started recording about our environment, and I was finishing up shoveling some snow here. I'm in Minnesota, and we just got 6 inches overnight. So it sort of changes your priorities when you have to get up and everything you think you had to do in the morning. Like I had calls scheduled, I had to meet my bookkeeper. But, when Mother Nature kicks in, like other priorities come to the forefront, and I had to cancel some stuff and move stuff around. And it's also interesting how that happened. I feel it's related to some of the stuff we're going to talk about here. So if you want to share where you're from and obviously some of the stuff that your town has been going through this past year.
Well, thank you. I live in Asheville, North Carolina. Asheville is in western North Carolina. For a little geography lesson, North Carolina is a very long state. We have an ocean coast. We have a middle section of city, Charlotte, and more Piedmont, they call it. And then we're in the mountains.
Yeah.
So it used to be back in the day that when you looked at a map of North Carolina, it ended in Asheville, North Carolina.
Mm,
And the rest of the state just looked like a vast wilderness,
yeah.
which it is a vast wilderness. However, it is populated with small towns and is considered very much a tourism destination. And the end of September, we were aware that there was a disaster headed our way.
Mm,
This is a very safe place. A lot of people come here for that reason. It's where the Appalachian Mountains, the Blue Ridge Mountains, and the Great Smoky Mountains all converge.
okay.
So there's a lot of waterfalls and wilderness and whitewater rafting and trails and beautiful vistas and just a beautiful region of our world, not just our country. Mountains as old as 10,000 years old.
Yeah.
The Cherokee live here, the Eastern Band of Cherokee. So, right at the end of September, there was a hurricane coming into the Gulf. And because of the warm water there, which has been happening over, many years,
Mm,
when that hurricane hit that warm water, it kicked it. It literally pushed it up like a pinball machine. Bing! And the ball just went up. And as it went up, it started to curve off to the left, but the elbow of that hurricane system hit these mountains, just hit it. And what that caused was a natural disaster. In fact, they're calling it a geological event. It
okay.
wasn't just biblical flooding and landslides, wind.
Yeah.
It was a geological event that caused uh, probably about 40% of our forest to be gone.
Wow.
So, being a tourist destination, Asheville and the county surrounding, for 3 days we had no contact to the outside world, none.
Wow.
We had no water. Our water system was completely ripped apart. People lost their homes. It was hard. You were talking about shoveling snow. We were shoveling other, we were
Digging out. Yeah.
taken out. And so, what's happened since is what we hear so much now in the news, the resiliency of the people coming together and
Hmm.
looking at rebuilding and rethinking. How can we be smarter? How can we be more mindful? And being able to witness true compassion and
Mm,
true empathy, which is what I talk about a lot in my show, speaking of travel,
yeah.
because as we travel the world, we try to bridge barriers. That's what we're looking at doing.
So was this the first time you had experienced an event of this size? And were you in your lifetime?
I can assure you, Harry, that nobody has ever experienced what we experienced.
Yeah.
Even we have a speakers program here of people who are coming to help, and we have a lot of speakers from New Orleans who have
Mm,
been through Katrina.
of course. Yeah.
This is like a Katrina,
Yeah. Yeah.
but even worse in some ways uh, because it was such a geological event in
Yeah.
the way that it actually shifted the earth.
Wow.
And when you think that the people were on that earth as it shifted,
Yeah.
there's a lot of, it's almost like imagine if you were shaken up in a snow globe
Yeah.
and then just let out. All the people who survived this event never would have ever. We have seen flooding here. We have
Hmm.
rivers
Sure.
uh, and everybody was prepared for that type of flooding or more, but this was, they have called it biblical
Yeah.
proportion,
Yeah.
and that's really what it is. So, no, I would say no. And the level of being terrified,
Mm,
of knowing, because we could see it coming. It was
mm.
on the Weather Channel. It was
Yeah. Yeah.
like, oh, here's a hurricane. It just hit warm water in the Gulf
Oh,
that we
wow.
know.
Yeah.
Doesn't take
Yeah.
a brain surgeon to figure out,
Yeah.
these storms are getting bigger and more fierce, and being able to recognize, my feeling is if people don't recognize that global warming is a thing after an event like this and what happened in California not long after us,
Hmm.
I think it's time to get on the bandwagon.
Yeah, for sure. So Marilyn, were you born and raised there?
No, I was born and raised in Washington, D.C.,
Okay.
so very cosmopolitan. Back in the day when I was growing up, we could walk right by the White House and,
Yeah.
see people waving in the backyard and
Okay.
go to the museums for free. And
Yeah.
it was a wonderful, I identify as a Washingtonian because I was actually born
Okay.
in the District of Columbia. But I moved to the mountains uh, 40 plus years ago, pretty much as a homesteader,
Okay.
like looking to get out of the big city,
Yeah.
seeing the writing on the wall as far as what was happening around the world, and feeling that maybe it would be best to kind of live off the grid and
Hmm.
live up in the mountains.
It's something that I've been thinking about recently as well. I grew up in New York City. I mean, I grew up in New York. I lived in Yonkers, just outside New York City, and then I moved into the city, and I just, fell in love with the city. This cosmopolitan life that you spoke of, just having so many options when it comes to museums and restaurants and culture is something that you really enjoy and experience. And you sort of deal with the trade-off of living in a box with no access to, water and nature. Thankfully, we have the beautiful Central Park, and there's beautiful parks in Washington as well. But I was in New York for Hurricane Sandy years ago, and that was a bit of a wake-up call because we lost power from 57th Street down, and I was with my ex-wife and I, we had all we could do is ride our bicycles. We lost water for a day, and we lost power for a week, and we were hanging, the groceries that were in our fridge in plastic bags outside the window because it was October. So it was just very jarring, and you'd have to go to a supermarket that was above 57th Street, and clearly, like, the shelves have been pretty, you know, wiped clean. And so it's been interesting to think about it. And I know that, you mentioned homesteading. So now I'm here in Minnesota now, and we're in the house that my partner grew up in, and her father was big into hunting. So you have a feel for like what it's like to have food that's been hunted, by someone. We have our own well, which is extremely something you don't really think about, but access to fresh water is really important. And then we're on a marsh that's thankfully all her parents and their neighbors pooled in together in the 80s to buy it, and they donated it back to the state of Minnesota. So there's one side of our property that will actually never get developed. So I'm curious, like, what was when you think about the driver for you, you did mention homesteading. What's that experience been like for you, moving out of the city and starting to realize it comes with its own set of challenges, for sure. We just got 5 chickens this past spring, and with the price of eggs lately, people are calling us up. But I'm curious what your experience has been.
Well, like I said, 40 years is a long time,
Yeah.
and we were very fortunate at that time to be able to buy a little old farm and had beautiful views and water that came right out of the spring into our home. Like you, we had chickens and had organic, gardens, uh, and we were quite high up on the mountain, so it took a little bit of time to get down into the town, but we always felt like if there was a natural disaster or something bad happened, we could be self-sufficient, right? And so at the same time, part of the appeal of coming here is the Appalachian Mountains, and the people who live here in Appalachia, uh, are very humble people. They are very community minded people. So we felt part of a growing community. In the little town of Asheville back then had been in the 20s quite a Gilded Age uh, place. It was George Vanderbilt came here and built his
Yeah.
home, and Frederick Law Olmsted, who you know from Central Park,
Mm-hmm.
designed George's house and home on 8,000 acres that's right in our town, and donated the rest of the land, the forest, to park, national
Mm-hmm.
parks. And actually, the School of Forestry was created right here in Western North Carolina because
Wow.
of George Vanderbilt and Frederick Law Olmsted. So
Yeah.
we have a very rich history here in Asheville. But then when the Depression came, when the market fell, all those rich people who had been putting so much money here left. So really all that was left was the Appalachian people who had always lived
Mm-hmm.
here. And the city at that time decided to not rebuild, not do any revitalization because they had taken out so much debt when all those rich people were coming.
Yeah.
They were going to pay off the debt. So when we moved here and were homesteading, we were coming into this little town that was starting to have little coffee shops, and there was a little vegetarian restaurant and
Yeah.
a bunch of hippies. And but then they paid off the debt, and the city was suddenly opened back up. And
Okay.
so over time it started to grow. So our homesteading started to merge and emerge with a growing community that we all
Mm-hmm.
helped to build.
Yeah.
So there's something very special about our town and our region here.
Yeah.
So as far as how did that work out for me, I don't live on that farm anymore. And actually, it was pretty well damaged in the storm because
Mm.
luckily there was so much beautiful water there. But the water was very powerful during the
Yeah.
storm and,
Yeah.
took out roads and things. So where I live now is just a little bit further into closer to the town. So
Okay.
I have, still a bit of wilderness, but there's a lot of development creeping in and growth,
Yeah.
as you can imagine. So, but overall, a community that is vibrant in farming, in making cheese and
Yeah.
being makers and
Yeah.
creators. Of course, you would want to live in an environment like that.
For sure. Yeah.
Right.
And I have a special place in my heart for Asheville. I'd been there a couple of times when I lived in Atlanta, actually, again with my ex. We drove up for Moogfest, which is for those that don't know, it's the festival dedicated or built around the creator of the Moog synthesizer, who I believe made Asheville his home. I don't know. I remember if he grew up there.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
he was a
Yeah.
homesteader.
Yeah.
In fact, he was part of our emerging town. So
Yeah.
his kids and our kids, everybody all, but we knew there was something special going on. In fact, I'll just give you a little aside, and I'm so glad to hear about your experience. So Moke had a factory here right on Broadway, beautiful, the people had bought a beautiful building and actually were still building the synthesizers and everything.
Yeah.
And just recently, after the storm, they decided to move the factory out of that building.
Okay.
And I just received an invitation to an opening there at that building
Yeah.
where the Mo people have given that space to artists who had lost. We had a
Oh,
river arts
wow.
district where all our
Yeah.
artists were that got wiped out.
Yeah.
They're going to now be in that building. So
Oh,
it's,
wow.
again, that spirit of being able to give back
Yeah.
to the community.
That's really
Mm,
nice. That's really
I
nice to
know.
hear.
I'm so glad you came up. Our paths might have crossed because I was there too.
Yeah, I remember it was one of those festivals where the town itself is sort of like, the campus, and the map had you like go, it was just things going on for I think 2 or 3 days, and it would be event would be at a bar and another one would be at a shop, and you're just walking crisscrossing across town, and I just remember all the little shops in there. We had a really, really, really fun time in there. So how do you see, I get the sense it's a very resilient community. So after everything that's happened with the disaster, we're now in March of 2025. What have you seen that gives you hope for, where you are on the path to rebuilding?
The story that I just told about the art going
Mm-hmm.
into the Moog building is very proud,
Yeah,
makes us very proud.
sure.
Uh, Being able to see how there is so much fundraising. I mean, that's the thing, people. If you've never been through a natural disaster, it's hard to even believe that people care.
Yeah.
And people were here within 3 or 4 days from all over the world,
Mm,
helping,
yeah.
digging out, rebuilding already. I mean, I can't even. begin to give you an idea of the amount of devastation that happened. It's I don't think as human beings we really have full capacity to recognize that something so horrible could happen,
Sure,
right?
sure, sure.
So anything is going to give you hope if
Yeah,
it's better than that.
yeah,
But to see the amount of people who have come in to help the restaurant people and how the restaurant, I mean, we just went through a pandemic,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
So to be able to see these restaurant owners who are so dedicated to their employees and their communities offer up so much and provide so much and be
Mm-hmm.
there, that level that I was talking about of empathy and compassion and
Yeah.
uh, fundraising and money going to grants specifically for artists, specifically for people who are musicians. There were stories of people who lost all their instruments, and within
Mm.
days, musicians coming from all over with instruments to give them.
Wow.
Like, that gives me hope,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
And then the music begins and it doesn't end. And there's a small town just north of where I live called Marshall,
Okay.
North Carolina. It was a very hip, little town that was starting to, this guy took the old Marshall jail and turned it into a little bed and breakfast. And there
Okay.
was a little bar on the river and a lot of artists up there. That town literally got washed away. It
Oh,
sits right on a river and it just
wow.
literally was washed away. So the people who lived there came out, in shock to see their town full of
Oh,
mud and ruined. And the first thing they did was have like a bluegrass
yeah.
concert in the mud. And then it
Wow.
became bigger to where they took it on the road and they started raising money. And
Yeah.
now the town is reemerging
It's
in a
nice.
different way,
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
but in a better way,
Yeah.
perhaps.
Yeah. It's so inspiring to see the human spirit at work and what people are capable of in terms of coming together and supporting each other.
And once you've seen it, you really don't want to go backwards.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So let's talk about your love of travel. Like, how did that start? Because it seems like I'd get the sense if I was following your trajectory from Washington to um, Asheville, like you'd be starting a homesteading podcast, not a travel podcast.
I
So talk
know.
to me about that.
It's funny how that unfolded. But when I grew up in DC as a child, a young child, imagine being able to roam through the Smithsonian
Oh, yeah,
as a kid
yeah.
and seeing display after display after display of Eskimos and Native
Mm,
Americans. And,
sure.
they had those beautiful, it was almost like a wax museum, when you think about it, of displays. I was always curious and had a wanderlust, but my parents didn't travel. My parents were they were immigrants, actually. They had traveled already on the
Okay.
big trip, if you know what I mean. In
Where they come
fact,
from?
they came from Ukraine,
Okay.
which was Russia at that time.
Yeah.
But then there was persecution.
Wow.
They came over to Ellis Island with my dad, who was a 6-month old baby.
Wow.
Their names are etched in
Oh, that's
Ellis Island, and so that's where my parents actually
okay.
and my family were lived.
Did you ever make it to Ellis Island?
Oh yeah, I've been
Okay.
there many times.
That must have been an experience to see your
It
family name
was.
there.
It was. And my cousins and I did one of those pictures where you dress up like an immigrant.
I'm an immigrant as well. I actually was born in El Salvador. I
Mm.
was brought here when I was a year old, but we didn't come through Ellis Island, so
Well,
there's
one of
no,
my best friends owned
yeah,
an island in Bermuda, and I used
yeah,
to always joke with her, your family came over and landed on the island of Bermuda. I get the island of Ellis.
yeah, yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so I didn't really travel, but we did do a lot of road tripping. My parents liked going to, I mean, we had so many places outside of DC
Yeah,
that we could go to. And this is a cute little story, but when I was a kid growing up, every year from childhood, we would take a field trip to Mount Vernon, right? If you've ever been there, it's the home
yeah,
of George Washington.
yeah,
And it looks out, when you're on the big veranda there, it looks out over the Shenandoah Valley, which eventually becomes the Great Smoky Mountains, the Blue
yeah.
Ridge Mountains. And when I moved to Asheville, not knowing, and lived in this mountain little farm. One day I was walking down my driveway and there was smoke coming out of the fireplace, out of the chimney. And I realized that all those years, my childhood years sitting on that veranda, suddenly I was there living,
That's great.
like foreshadowing or
Of
something was
course.
happening, right?
Yeah.
But it really wasn't until my friend who owned the island in Bermuda invited me to go there with her
Okay.
during the summer.
Yeah.
So that was really, and I'd been to California. I mean, I'd done a little traveling as a teenager, but not like that. But then I went to Italy with a friend and Croatia, and that was the big aha moment.
Okay.
And I think it was because now that I've been able to go back there so many times that, when you think about your family, yours is El Salvador, mine is
Yeah.
Ukraine, but they come all different places.
Of
They
course.
didn't just get there. So sometimes when you travel, you feel like, oh, this feels like I've been here before, or this
Mm.
feels like home, or this
Yeah.
feels. That's when I really started realizing travel is more than just going to visit a place. It's going to find yourself a little bit,
Yeah.
right? And I was very fortunate because my background while I'm homesteading, I also ran an ad agency. So I had a downtown me and a country me for 18 years. And we had clients who were all in the travel and tourism industry and hospitality, and these were all emerging
Mm-hmm.
industries, right? So I had a position at the table, if you will, of what was going on as we created our own travel destination. And so I did a lot of work in the media, and this friend of mine was starting a low powered, community based radio network,
Okay.
right? So he was creating content to run. And I thought, what if I did a show and talked to my friends who all traveled? I had friends who were in the Peace Corps when they were in college, or friends who had been to Israel, or friends who had been other places that were very exotic. And so I pitched the idea. He bought it. He said, yeah, let's do it. So that's how Speaking of Travel started. It was just a 30-minute show
Yeah.
where he had a hotel suite.
Okay.
I would leave my office, go up to the hotel. I had a producer and a whole crew. And then it just grew. And a couple of years later, I went over to iHeartRadio, and I've been there on that platform for the past 10 years.
So talk to me
So
about those early days, Marilyn. Like, how much did you prepare, train, or have experience with like hosting a show like this? And what were those early days like?
I think because I was in the media so much on the other side, I was doing a
Yeah.
lot of media buying for my clients. I loved radio, especially.
Sure.
I always felt radio was an important foundation for any marketing plan. Public radio, country radio, the radio was kind of our thing.
Mm-hmm.
So in those early days, I really felt more like I was a radio show because it
Mm-hmm.
wasn't really a podcast
Yeah. Yeah.
at that
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
And iHeartRadio at that time, they had an app, the iHeartRadio app, where you could upload your radio show to this app and
Okay.
people could
What year was
listen.
this?
And this was 2013,
Okay.
2014, 15,
Okay.
kind of in that area.
Yeah.
So the only training I had was being in the media, knowing people who were DJs and other,
Yeah.
but I was very lucky because the radio network that I'm on right now in Western North Carolina is the oldest radio network. In fact, it started in Atlanta. It's one of the
Okay.
oldest radio stations in the country called WWNC. And their programming over all 50 plus years, started with people who literally read the newspaper and people would
Wow.
listen, right?
Wow.
So I would sit in on some of the shows as they were being
Okay.
recorded, and I would watch how they did it. And I just always was that kid too who liked talking to people, and so it wasn't hard for me to do it. As time went on, I felt like I needed to be more polished, and they all the people at the radio station were very helpful in giving me tips.
Yeah.
But then I started doing improv. Have you
Oh,
ever
okay.
done improv?
I took a couple of classes, funny enough, when I lived in Atlanta, and it was
Yeah.
fun. I never pursued, I did study acting. I studied acting for about 3 years when I lived in New
Yeah.
York. So,
Yeah. So
yeah,
acting,
yeah,
improv,
yeah,
being able to recognize being a good listener, being able
yep.
to connect with people,
Being
uh,
in the moment. Yeah.
really helped me move forward in the way that I do my show.
Hmm. And so it looks like you're closing in on 500 episodes. Is that right?
That's what I'm closing in on that platform. I've
Yeah.
probably done way more than that because
S-
sometimes I do 2 or 3 shows in a week
Wow.
and just put them in my, you know,
In your
in
queue,
the can, in the
in the
queue.
can. So when did you start to become aware of like this growing world of podcasting? Because you were coming at it from this world of the radio, right? And it's a different mindset, growing up in the 80s myself, it's the DJs, it's the commercial breaks, it's a whole different way of programming, even the way people speak, right? Hey, it's Harry from WWCS. It's so funny because, when I first started this show, I interviewed a couple of people that were coming from radio, and it's so funny. It's hard for them to switch out of that voice, that radio voice. And they would be like, "Hey, Harry, good to see you." And then you could see that it's almost like an affectation that they just can't shake. And so you're in that world of radio. And then how did you start to become aware of what was happening? Because, podcasting has been growing. I started my show in 2014, and I thought I was late at that point, and so much has changed since then. So what was your like awakening to, what we now see as this big medium that's podcasting?
I love that question because coming from that radio side, I never even really identified as a podcaster. I
Yeah,
identified as a radio show
sure,
host.
sure.
It was my producer who actually said, you know what, you need to look, this was years ago, having a platform where you can
Hmm.
upload the shows
Yeah.
and then you can put them out there to all the platforms.
Hmm.
And that's when I started doing that and putting the episodes up to be spread out all over the world. And over time, because I'm in marketing, as I started to kind of recreate my brand of speaking
Mm.
of travel, I suddenly realized I kept getting these invitations to Podfest, right?
Oh, yeah, in Florida. Yeah.
In Orlando, Florida,
Yeah. I was just
uh,
there. We were just there
in
with
January,
with my
right?
partner. Yeah.
Yeah. So I finally, after all those years of being invited, said, I'm going to go. That was last year. I went last year
Oh, okay.
in January
Yeah.
to Orlando. And it was the first time that I'd ever really identified as a podcaster.
Wow.
And I was just taken aback, to be honest with you, that this industry is what it is. And
Yeah.
there's so many different ways to look at what podcasting is as an industry. So I was a little shy, I didn't feel
Yeah.
that I wanted to kind of jump in but I went to the sessions and I
Mm-hmm.
went to some of the after parties
Mm-hmm.
and was able to do a little schmoozing with people and met
Sure.
some really great people. I just haven't quite felt, I want to do that more.
Mm-hmm.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I want to be a part of it and I want to grow and I want more people to listen, obviously, to my show
Sure.
because I have such great guests and it's about them.
Yeah.
So, as a marketing person, I want to promote their
Of
stories.
course. Of course.
And yet, I also want to be able to learn more about the industry. And I'll tell you real quick because this is kind of real time. But I interviewed this guy years ago who's a really wonderful man. He had a couple of kids, and he and his wife traveled, and they had a YouTube channel
Yeah.
where he was the dad with the kids. And after 1 million followers, I contacted him and asked him to be on my show.
Sure.
Well, it turns out he's a college professor at the University of Illinois in
Okay.
marketing and PR. So at the end of last year, he invited me to throw my name in my business in a hat, so to speak,
Yeah.
for interns, for an intern, to get an intern.
Okay.
So and they picked. It wasn't like they just picked the name out. I had to send a lot of information about my show and what my business is about. But I got picked by a team of
Wow.
5 young college women who just sent me, I'm reading it now, their first draft of a strategic marketing plan around the show.
Wow.
But the first part of their research is all about podcasting and what
Okay.
it is today. So I've
Okay.
got 5 college students
Wow.
doing this research for me, which is so eye opening because they're the generation
Of
who's
course.
coming in who don't even understand themselves what podcasting is
Sure,
all
sure, sure.
about.
Yeah.
So I just started reading. It's 20 pages. This
Wow. So they finished
first,
it.
well, just this first
First draft.
draft
Okay.
that they'll present to their professor with all their findings of the research they've done just over the past 3
Well, I
weeks.
definitely want to, I mean, the marketer in me wants to see the whole 20 pages, but obviously, given the time constraints of this episode, what stood out from you from that first pass through?
That they got me.
Yeah.
They understood what my
Yeah.
mission is about and my
Yeah.
unique selling proposition and what that's about.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I've only touched on starting the full on reading, but basically they get into a lot of information about what podcasting is today and how it's changing the way that people get information. I'll
What do you
fill you
think
in.
is helpful for you when you think about actionable next steps for you and your show?
Well, that's part of their assignment is to find those actionable steps. And they've already recognized that what I lack is, I'm pretty straightforward. I have a radio show that's then a
Mm-hmm.
podcast.
Sure.
I don't do YouTube. I don't have a YouTube channel. I don't come on and say, oh, here's Marilyn and I'm in Vienna or
Do you
uh,
record your episodes on
tape
video?
my show. No,
Are
I
you
don't.
okay? So it's all audio.
But it's all done.
Okay.
I do mine via Zoom. Like you're in this,
Sure.
I'm in Zoom because that makes it for me. It's just always made it easy because my guests are so varied. I mean, I have guests who might not be
Yeah.
so tech savvy. Zoom
Sure,
they can
sure.
get, and then I have a whole. So I used to record the show at the radio station. I had my producer but then at
Okay.
COVID we couldn't go there, so we set up our own
Mm-hmm.
home studios. So now and that's what I actually went to college for. My background was in video and audio
Okay.
production in mass comm, but I ended up going to work for an ad agency for 18 years and hired
Okay.
people to do all that.
Okay.
Now it's like, oh
Yeah.
yeah, now I'm back where I started. So I love,
And the tools have changed a lot because I never used to touch video when we started our agency because I own a podcast production agency and we help clients launch their shows and we were just focused on audio, right? And I dabbled in like a couple of the Adobe programs. It was just too overwhelming. But now there's a new tool called Descript where you can upload your video, it'll transcribe it, and then what you do is you delete the word in the transcription or the phrase, and it'll
oh,
edit out the
well,
video part.
okay.
So you're not even messing with like these timeline. You could mess with a timeline view, which I've learned how to use to tweak because sometimes the cut is it's very abrupt and you have to leave a little space for breathing for what humans normally do. I think people get too excited when they do their first edit. Even on audio, I did. You would cut out all the silences, and some of those silences were actually people breathing,
It's funny.
which
I had
sounds
that very
very
discussion
jarring.
just today. I had lunch with my producer, and we were talking about how
Yeah.
far my edit skills have come because I've brought in tech people to help me
Hmm.
to learn how to do better. And now I feel like I really get it. And he said,
Yeah.
remember when you used to do just what you said? I would see space and I'd think, oh, that's way too much space,
Yeah.
and then it would be, oh, like a little jump cut almost. And I don't do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, the new tools and some of these AI tools for writing summaries of the episodes and even the clips, like now Descript does a great job with clips. So it'll take a 30-second, it'll watch the entire video. Watch it is probably a weird word to use, but it'll analyze the entire video and then pull in a 30-second snippet that's like a highlight. And now we use those from a marketing perspective. So I'm sure, there's so many, it's hard to keep up sometimes, but they are making things
Yes.
easier for
And
creators for
what
sure.
these lovely young women are going to be showing me is, look, you can grow. You can learn how to use these new tools. You can do more things. And here's what we would suggest you do and how to do it to get more.
Hmm.
And I love that idea. I still am from the old school, though. I think of, people are listening to it's like StoryCorps. I think of my show sometimes like StoryCorps or, I want to
Yeah.
capture your story. That's the depth of what it's all about. And the other part is kind of the bells and whistles that go with it. And I do want to bring people in.
Yeah, and I think what's important, and I've talked about this a lot, is this idea of helping people find their voice, right? And that's why I keep doing the show. It's not like it's a profitable or wildly popular show, but I get to like highlight voices that are doing interesting things in the podcasting space, which in turns inspires my listeners and viewers who are also podcasters to see how many different ways there are to podcast, and there's no one single path. And to your point of like highlighting these stories of the people, it's an interesting thing to think about because not only do I want to take the time to, capture their story and let them tell their story, but I feel like I have a responsibility to also make sure as many people as possible find it and hear it and see it. So I think, that's where we as creators who are, doing the work of finding the voices, which is already hard enough, right? It's already hard enough to find the person with the story, then to get it recorded and to get them to be a good enough interviewer to get the story out of them. Like already you feel like, wow, phew, done. But then it's just like, it's almost like that step one, because then you're like, okay, now how do I share this story? What's of it? What's changed now in the marketing landscape? How do maybe it is, important to YouTube is the number two search engine. So now we've been conscious of us in the agency, like to really think about even if it's just starting with audio only content. I just had a session with one of my students, so, it's audio only content, but we're looking at creative ways to leverage the YouTube algorithm because YouTube is a search engine, right? It's looking at titles of episodes, it's reading the description in there, and people may come and find it and realize it's only audio, but then they're like, oh, at least they know about this show. So a lot of things, and it's nice to have some help, that you have some help from a younger generation to who
I'm very
understands how some of these
excited.
things
I
work.
really am because I know that all this is there and it's available. And for me to be so privileged to have a group of students who are looking at it from an outside research point of view, and then to be able to make recommendations. And then whether I do it myself, which is, that in itself is very challenging, as you know, where's the time in the day to do all this?
Yeah,
Or
of
being able
course.
to be self sustaining enough and revenue sourcing enough to have money to then turn around and
Yeah,
bring in other people to do it for you. Like that's what my ultimate goal is. And I've always been able to, I
sure.
come from an ad agency background. After the agency parted ways because my business partner retired, I took the opportunity to
Yeah.
start my own company doing marketing and PR. So
Hmm.
that's always been a revenue
Okay.
source. A couple of years ago, I made a
Okay.
decision, I'm just not, I don't want to do that anymore. I don't want to do marketing and PR for other people. I want to do it for me. I want to focus on me. It's all
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
me and this show right now.
Yeah.
And so, part of the hustle is going out and getting sponsors who believe that my show is worthy.
Of
And I've
course.
been, knock on wood, very fortunate to have the Asheville Regional
Good.
Airport, the Subaru dealership,
Great.
the largest tourism membership organization in our region supporting, speaking of
That's
travel.
nice.
At the same time, that gives me even more responsibility to keep the show growing. And that takes more
Of
money
course.
and
Yeah.
more time and more
Yeah.
this and more that. And what it all comes down to is how deep is your passion and purpose in
Yep.
doing what you're doing with your platform and your voice.
Yeah. And you have help right now with this intern team, but other than that, is it
I
just you
always
working on
have,
the
that's
show?
where I was going with this because I come from an ad agency, you know, head. I always have a team.
Yeah.
Like it's hard to just do anything all by
Hmm.
yourself. So it's always good to have you're a good
Sure,
bookkeeper, you're a
sure.
good attorney, you're a good plumber, you're a good
Yeah.
graphic design
Yeah,
person,
of
uh,
course.
you're whatever. I like to pull in what I tell people, because I teach marketing too, is, you have to hire to your weakness. And so
That's a
when
good
I
point.
look at, okay, where am I stalled? Where do I need to be? How can I get more help to be able to first identify what are my weaknesses? And then I can start focusing
Sure.
on, do you know somebody who could fill this fill in the blank?
Yeah. I've heard that referred to as finding, there's a good book by Dan Sullivan, Who, Not How, because a lot of times entrepreneurs, as they get bigger and they grow their businesses, they keep thinking that, like, I'm just, how do I do this? How do I do this? And they try to figure out, like, how to get things done. But sometimes the right question to ask is, who can do this for me? Because, who's got the skill set to do this that's better than mine? And I could probably figure it out, but it's not my genius, right? And it's not where I should be spending my time. So that's a good question to be asking yourself, like, who's the right person to
Absolutely.
help you
And
get
we
to the
have to
next
be
level
able
of
to
your show?
be logistic thinking. You know, the whole logistics is
Yeah, for
another
sure.
new, supply chain logistics. Being able to look at is becoming a little bit
Yeah,
more mainstream now, and I think that's something that we can focus
absolutely.
on too. Is looking at it from a flow chart kind of thing. Okay, here's me doing this, and then here's the team doing these things.
Yeah. So, Marilyn, I'm curious, since you started the show, there's a lot you've probably learned along the way, but if looking back now, I know it's hard to measure progress as you're going through it year after year, but now looking back to when you started the show, how have you grown as a host
It's
since then?
interesting what you said just before about being inspired by the podcasting community that you are with. My community are people who
Yeah.
travel, and my show is the people that I bring in. Sometimes the topic is okay, it's travel related, but it's not really about going to a destination. It's about maybe an inner journey that they've had or some mindfulness that has happened. But more than anything, that
Sure.
sense of risk, taking a good risk, being able to step out and
Mm.
say,
Yeah,
there was
yeah, yeah.
something just not right about going to work every day in a bank and having to go get clothes to wear that were always
Mm.
uncomfortable when I could be backpacking through Tibet. I could be hiking the Himalayas right now.
Mm.
So, how can we
Sure, sure.
take the steps, maybe just little baby steps, to get us to that place? Well,
Yeah.
imagine me hearing these stories week after week after week when I can't even change the
Yeah,
furniture in
yeah.
my living room. Seriously. So, the show for
Yeah,
me, I feel
yeah.
like I've had a decade of therapy in a lot of ways that people
Wow,
are so
that's great.
intriguing in the way that they go about their lives to recognize, say, I'm done here. This doesn't serve me anymore. I'm going to do this. And then
Mm.
going, I thought
Yeah,
COVID would be the end of a travel show. Who's traveling? Everybody's landlocked or, locked down. And yet, what I found were people
yeah,
wanted to talk about the quiet, what it was like not to travel, what it was like to think and go deeper,
oh yeah,
and what are we going to do to come back out better people? And me having that longevity to be able
sure.
to speak to those same people 4 years later who are now doing their own podcast, or they're doing art, or they're doing something that
Oh
was
wow.
totally out of
Yeah,
their comfort zone 4 years ago. That is what we all need to hear. Those are the
wow.
stories we need to hear, right?
That's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting perspective and the fact that you're able to have these conversations and you can see the journey that people go through even on your show or even through the course of the interview as well. So you mentioned a little bit about monetization. I'm curious, and a lot of people are interested that listen and watch as well. What has that journey been like for you? And is that something you thought about early on, looking for opportunities to monetize? You did mention sponsors. I'm curious if you could just kind of give a snapshot of what's working or what you've tried
Coming
and
from a
hasn't worked.
marketing background, I'm always thinking marketing, right? I mean, so, right.
Same here. Yeah. I worked at E-Trade and JP Morgan Chase in corporate marketing. And so I learned a lot being a
Exactly.
fly on
So
the
you
wall in
kind of
those
know
in those companies.
what you want and what your goals are, and you think about how am I going to strategically create that to happen. So basically, what I did was, in those early years, I had to think who would be a good match for a travel show. And I also had to recognize how do I sell it when I have got nothing to show? Nothing. I don't have any return on investment. I don't even know what I'm doing here. All I know is people are going to tell me their stories and it's going to be really great. So I called it
Yeah.
faith based marketing. You have to have faith that you know me and I'm so cool that whatever I do, you're going to want to be a part of it and endorse it. And it
That's
took a
great.
couple of years,
Yeah.
a lot of perseverance. But remember, I hadn't quit my day job, right? So it wasn't like I have to
Okay.
have a
Yeah.
revenue
Smart.
source. My long term goal, however, was I want my show to be a revenue source and I want to be able to travel and have someone else pay for it. So, how do I get to those
Yeah.
end
Yeah.
goals, right? I had to take little baby steps. So I created a little one sheeter of what I thought my show was about. Took me a
Mm-hmm.
couple of years to kind of perfect that to a point where I felt I could go out and sell, speaking of travel, that and sell it more as a
Mm.
community based type of show because it was on our heart and it was regional and local here. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and eventually it would grow to be a global podcast, global listenership. And so I just basically went door to door to people who I thought were my friends or colleagues,
Yeah.
people who I felt were a good fit, that I did some trade. I have to say that was good to begin. I
Okay. Yeah.
found a
Yeah.
couple
Of
of
course. Yeah.
businesses that I wanted to utilize their product and did some trade. So it was kind of a mixture of
Yeah.
all of that to getting to a place where I actually, when you talk about hire to your weakness, hired a business coach. Like, help me.
Okay.
I knew my goal was
Yeah.
to wean myself out of my company and doing marketing and PR for other people
Mm-hmm.
and just focusing on me. How do I do that?
Yeah.
What steps do I need to take to be prepared financially, mentally, the whole bit?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
with all that said, the sponsors, she finally said, because I was just doing like a 3 month, oh, just come on for 3 months. I only did I
Yeah.
didn't do 1 month. It had to
Sure.
be at
Sure.
least a commitment of 3 months.
Yeah.
Right. But the
Yeah. It's best practice.
coach
Yeah.
that I was working with said, why do you have to do 3 months? Why can't you just do annual? They either buy it for the whole year or you don't
Yeah.
want them to be, you don't need them.
Of course.
And I was like, oh
Of
my
course.
God, I can't
Yeah.
do that. That's a big commitment right there. That's asking a lot of money up front. And, you
Yeah.
know, but I did
Sure.
it.
Sure.
And guess what? You
Yeah.
have 3 annual
They said
sponsors,
yes.
then at least I know what my revenue source could be. And it can fluctuate.
Of
Life
course. Yeah.
changes,
Yeah.
expenses change. It's not my end all like it
Yeah.
was when I was a
Yeah.
young marketing executive and wanting more and more and more money.
Mm-hmm.
It's now about, all right, how can I live the
Yeah.
lifestyle that fits me, do what I love to do,
Mm.
not really have to leave my house if I don't want to. I
How many
have to
episodes do you
do
do a
one a
week?
week because I have the show and it has to be
One a
done
week.
for my
Okay.
producer.
Sure.
However, I have
Sure.
started to travel again, and last year I was gone for a month. So I learned how to do two per week some weeks, and like I said, put them in the
Okay.
queue. And
Yeah.
then I learned how to schedule them.
Yep.
My producer would have them all done and approved, scheduled.
Yep.
So when I'm gone, they just show up. So that's now I do
Okay.
Like this week, I'm doing 3. So it just depends. But I'm trying to
Okay.
figure out how I can do enough to then take more time off, right?
Yeah. Who are you
Buzzsprout.
hosting with?
And when I started with Buzzsprout, I'll just give
Buzzsprout. Oh,
Buzzsprout
they're
a
a
little
great
shout
company.
out.
I love them.
They were just really emerging
Yeah.
as a platform. And I started with them and I've been with them
Hmm.
ever since because I've watched them grow. It's really been fun watching them grow and adhere
Yeah, for
to
sure.
this
Yeah.
industry. And then I met them at the Podfest.
Yeah.
All of them, yeah. They're all so
Oh,
sweet.
yeah,
And
that's
they
right. Did you meet Albin?
they have great
Albin.
customer
Head of
service,
marketing.
which
Yeah.
I
He's
always
been on the show a couple of
appreciate.
times. He's a great guy.
And I've actually, over the course of my
Yeah.
podcasting
That's great.
career, I've done 4 other podcasts. I did a children's podcast during COVID. I've worked with a
Okay.
veterans organization doing a
Yeah.
podcast for the veterans and their stories. So
Okay.
my producer and I can produce other people's
Yeah.
podcasts, but I put them up on Buzzsprout too. So
Nice. So, yeah, that's very inspiring. Maybe you can share that one sheet because we'd love to kind of give people examples of things that are working for you.
for
So,
the
that,
sponsorship,
yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah,
that'd be
I'd
helpful
be
because a lot of
happy
people,
to.
yeah.
And again, I just started a new sponsorship is starting right now. A county here in Western North Carolina. Getting money through a county right now is very challenging
Yeah.
because of
Yeah.
everything that's happened. But what this county is doing is, and I've had them on my show a number of times to talk about it, but they have a Leave No Trace program. Half of their county is wilderness and
Okay.
waterfall, so they do waterfall safety
Okay.
programs. This is a perfect match for them. And I
Yeah,
said,
for
why don't
sure.
you come on my show as a sponsor? And they were like, oh, we can't afford that. And I said, well, look, what can you afford?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's what we're doing. I'm
That's the
giving
good question.
them
Yeah.
what I would give somebody else.
Yeah.
So, I think that's important for people to recognize that you have to be able to be flexible and
Of course.
expanding and
Yeah.
giving. So much of it, and for us
Yeah,
especially,
especially if
is
you want to build a long-term relationship. I do that sometimes with, either clients or sponsors for one of my other shows. And sometimes, they can't meet the budget. And one of the best questions I've learned to ask is like, what would make this a no-brainer for you? And they're like, oh, okay, well, they have some flexibility. And then I just look and they're like, just someone that I want to build a relationship with, and sometimes, you take a cut on the front end and then it turns out into this long-term relationship and everyone's happy and we both grow together.
well, I teach that as well in my marketing class.
That's
That
great.
if you want to have loyalty and longevity, and now I can actually say, okay, I have empirical evidence to that effect because I have had relationships with clients for 30 years.
Wow, that's
It
amazing.
is amazing.
It's a couple of questions. Thank you so much for your time. Just
Of
as we
course.
wrap up, I'd like to have a couple of questions for
Hmm.
my guests. One is, what is something you've changed your mind about recently?
I would say uh, maybe uh, being able to look deeper into other people's shoes, like walking in
Hmm.
other people's
Yeah,
shoes.
yeah, yeah,
You
yeah.
know what I
It's
mean? I
important.
think we
Sure.
get a little judgmental, maybe, or a little angry, and
Yeah,
perceptions can enter into.
yeah,
And as somebody who is such a tree hugger and, is trying to bridge cultures and build bridges and
yeah,
connect people, sometimes it's hard
yeah,
to
for sure.
walk the walk. And so I would say if anything has changed recently, it's being able to uh, put myself in somebody else's story for a
Yeah.
minute.
I think that's a really important skill, especially in this world that we live in. And it's also this ability to be able to hear a differing viewpoint and maybe not agree with it, but also understand that you can, respect someone's viewpoint. You can agree without being disagreeable. I've heard that phrase used, which I think is helpful because, we're not all going to agree 100% on everything at the end of the day. And I think we all have to remember that we're all humans and see the little child in each one of us, I think is really important. So I appreciate you sharing that. What do you think is the most misunderstood thing about you?
Well, that's so subjective.
Of course.
I think sometimes as you would probably recognize in an advertising career, especially that, that old imposter syndrome
Yeah,
steps in,
for
right?
sure, for
Like,
sure.
who am I to be wearing this hat or doing these great things or
Yeah.
whatever, fill in the blank. And I think people sometimes misunderstand me for my accomplishments and what I've really
Mm,
been able to accomplish in my career and my life. And
yeah.
not that I'm looking for that kind of recognition, but sometimes I feel like I was in that imposter syndrome for so long that I was, like you were saying, I had not found my voice. And now, especially since COVID and certainly since we went through this storm, I feel more strongly than ever that I have found my voice and I'm strong with that voice. And maybe people just don't recognize yet how important that is.
That's great to hear. It's very inspiring. Nice way to put a bow on this conversation.
Thank
So
you.
thank you so much for that opportunity and for reaching out, Marilyn, as well. I think you talked about this importance as podcasters to do the things, the little things. And you reached out based on one of my past guests, and that's how we crossed paths. And you found the show, and you reached out, and it's a reminder to me to kind of do the same because I need to start appearing on more shows. But also a reminder to anyone who's watching and listening who are likely podcasters. Sometimes you have to get out of your comfort zone, and if you're really passionate about sharing the stories of the people that you have on your show, it's almost like you have a responsibility to just get up and do something different. That 1% improvement every day, I think, is really important. And it's so interesting to see how your journey has taken you from like your early days in Washington to feeling that pull to get more in touch with the land and now telling these stories of people who've had experience with their travel. It's very inspiring to see and everything you've learned in your career with marketing and radio, how it's all converged. Because if you look back, you wouldn't have known that you could have put all these pieces together to get you to where you are now. It's really inspiring to see. And so I appreciate you coming on and sharing your story.
Well, thank you, Harry. I appreciate that. And it is true. It's almost like when you live out in nature for so long, you start living like nature does.
Oh, yeah.
Patience
Oh,
and
yeah.
perseverance and patience. All those things. It just takes
Sure.
time
Yeah.
to develop, and you don't really know that that little pine cone is eventually going to grow into that giant pine
Yeah,
tree.
for
Just
sure.
right. So, well, I applaud what you're doing. I think it's great, and I'm really glad that we've connected, and I look forward to doing more together.
Yeah. Maybe I'll come on and share one of my travel
I would
stories.
love that. I think we should
That'd be fun.
definitely get that in the queue.
Yeah. Yeah. So where's the best place for folks to connect and to learn more about you?
They can go to my website, which is speakingoftravel.net.
Yep.
And on the website, there's a link that will take you to all my past podcast
Okay.
episodes. And you can see who the guests are. I try to put a really good description
Yeah.
in the title so you can get an idea. I mean, I interviewed a woman just a couple of weeks ago. She's a scientist. The whole show is about microbes.
Oh, wow.
So, who even knows what microbes are and why are they important
Yeah.
to travel? But they
Yeah.
are,
They are. Yeah, for
right.
sure.
So I think people will have fun being able to go in and say, oh, look, here's somebody who's talking about riding a bike in
Mm.
Italy or
Mm.
whatever. There's so many crazy,
Yeah.
creative people out there, and I love connecting with them. So
Well, I'm excited for folks to listen and to watch this episode. And we'll make sure we have all the links in the show notes as well. Thanks again for your time, Marilyn.
thank
Appreciate it.
you. Thank you, Harry.